All right. Let's get everybody in here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is John Lacey. I'm a project manager here at the University of Tennessee, and I'll be your host. Before we jump into this, let's have a little fun this morning. I would like everybody with us to think back to science class or a science experiment you did as a child and or just in school at some point. And if we could get one or two brave souls to share with us any fun, entertaining, or wacky memories from a science class. And if you just want to maybe type your name in the chat that you're willing to share, that'd be great. I see that we have Chase Whitmire. Chase, surely you have a story you can share with us, right?
Absolutely.
All right, let's hear it, buddy.
So seventh grade class, Mr. Evans was his name. And we had it was absolutely bizarre. We had a hand surgeon from Erlanger Hospital. I grew up in Chattanooga, who brought in a cadaver hand that we got to dissect. And I'll never forget, the hand is laying there, on the table. You pull it out of the formaldehyde. And the surgeon was showing us this hand to dissect, and he would hit these whatever nerves or whatever, and the fingers would move. I remember having nightmares for weeks after that class. But that was my science experiment that I will never forget.
Oh my gosh, that's a great one.
Yep.
Thanks, Chase. I couldn't have asked for a better example. That's perfect. Anybody else willing to share from science class? Well, that's a tough one to top. So maybe we'll just move on from there. Thank you, Chase. That was excellent. Excellent. Okay, so this morning we're presenting how to switch your business model, how the Adventure Science Center adapted their hands-on experience into a virtual world, and just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, just type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel, and myself or someone on our team will bring them up during the Q&A portion of the session following the presentation. And then we are recording this session, so we ask that everybody remain on mute throughout our time. And if you have a question at the end that would be best communicated verbally, just let us know in the chat and we'll call you up and let you ask that directly. And of course, we expect everybody to follow a code of conduct that's outlined on our webinar website. So if you want to check that out, you can. But I think we all kind of know maybe some of the general rules of that. But here's what you can expect from us today. So this session has been designed to provide you all with how to adapt your mindset from focusing on setbacks to focusing on opportunities in order to deliver on your mission. How an organization that depended almost entirely on in-person public experiences stayed relevant in an environment where those experiences weren't possible. And how the Science Center is building an entirely new channel for serving its purpose of transforming lives through science and innovation. And how listening enables you to adapt to the needs of your partners and stakeholders. And also how the center has used the temporary shutdown to channel its energy into short-term tactics that have transformed its long-term approach. So now it's time for us to meet our presenters. We have with us today Steve Hinkley. Steve is president and CEO of the Adventure Science Center, Nashville. He joined the center in July of 2017 to work alongside board members, staff, and community leaders to initiate and implement a multi-year transformation to become a premier hands-on space for science and creativity. And prior to moving to Nashville, Steve served as president and CEO of MOXIE, the Wolf Museum of Exploration and Innovation in Santa Barbara, California, where he completed a startup capital campaign and a grand opening of a new 25,000 square foot science center in the heart of Santa Barbara in the waterfront district. He began his museum career in 2007 with the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas, where he oversaw exhibit and education program development for highly successful 2012 launch of an all-new 185,000 square foot science center in downtown Dallas. And before joining the science museum field, he spent 10 years in the classroom teaching middle and high school biology, physics, and physiology. We also have with us Jason Moeller. Jason is the education director of the Adventure Science Center. He's also the homeschool instructor for the center's Lyceum program, which he started in 2017. And what he loves most about his current role is the wide range of sciences, the science that he has the opportunity to teach. He has a special love for herpetology, Snakes are his favorite, he says, and he volunteers at the Nashville Zoo on the weekends. But he's also loves sports science, natural disasters, aircraft, and oceanography. And before moving to Nashville, he worked as the school programs coordinator at Zoo Knoxville from 2010 to 2016, where one of his primary responsibilities was teaching the zoo's homeschool program. And Jason is originally from St. Louis, Missouri, where he found his passion for teaching science as a summer camp counselor at the St. Louis Zoo. And he's a 2009 graduate of Indiana University. So welcome, Jason. Welcome, Steve. And so without further ado, we'll just let you guys take it from here.
Well, thanks, John. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Steve Hinkley, and Jason Muller is on the other side of a table from me right now. But when we flip over to his portion, I will make sure to shift the computer screen, and then you'll get to have a second introduction to him. But I want to thank both you and UT for hosting us today. I'm just now looking at my picture up there on the screen and realizing just what an effect COVID has had on on me personally. That should be kind of a harbinger of what's to come in the rest of the time today. But it's been quite a journey over the last several months, as I'm sure many of you have also had. But we're excited to be part of this. Thanks for having us today so that we can share a little bit about what we've learned, knowing that we're still on that curve, very much so. And then also one of the things that we'll do, which should be a fun little diversion today, is to have Jason lead you through an activity that's somewhat representative of how we are shifting our model of hands-on engagement into a virtual / hands-on, what we call a hybrid model that I think y'all will enjoy, or at least get a sense of how we go about it, trying to accomplish that work. So we've chosen to title today "A Happy Little Accident" because we believe that we're going to look through the world through rose-colored glasses, not blinders, but glasses for sure. We definitely still are very aware of everything that's going on, but we're trying to take an optimistic approach and see the opportunities that are out there in front of us so that we can adapt and make sure that the center continues to thrive. We are actually celebrating our 75th year in existence. We started as the Children's Museum of Nashville in 1945, and so here we are 75 years later, continuing to serve the community in a huge regard, and certainly not the way we anticipated celebrating our birthday, which officially is this Saturday, October 31st. But right now, certainly our efforts and our focus are on making sure that we can continue to serve this community as well as the state of Tennessee for the next 75 years. It's really our core focus at this moment. So to give you just a little bit of background in terms of who we are, I wanted to share just a few numbers with you. Before COVID, so as of February of 2020, really we were serving close to 400,000 visitors annually. They were coming from all 95 counties in Tennessee, 50 US states and US territories, and then we also had visitors coming from all over the world. Nashville certainly is a big tourist destination, and about 35% of our annual traffic comes from that tourist market that comes right here. For those of you who haven't been to the Science Center or maybe even to Nashville, we're located almost exactly a mile away from the convention center in downtown. So we're very, very close to a lot of that downtown activity. Every now and again, one of those famous bachelorette parties will make their way up here and spend some time in our planetarium show, which I think is a great success and a testament to the fact that our experience really translates across all different generations, although certainly families with young kids are our core demographic. We serve annually about 70,000 or more school students through on-site programs. This is where they get in a bus or in their vehicles, come to the Science Center. They go through our exhibit tours, which can be somewhat self-guided, but then we can also do facilitated lab experiences with them. And that's what folks like Jason do on a daily basis, serving hundreds and hundreds of kids in our Science Center. Or we can also go off-site. We do have a vehicle and we can take our lessons out to the community. We can participate in weekend public programs, community fairs, as well as going out to the schools and really tying in our hands-on experience to the curriculum that they are delivering in the classroom. We have about 5,000 new square feet of exhibits that have opened in the last year. I'll touch on that in just a little bit. And then every year we also engage about 885 community volunteers to help us deliver our mission. That's how things looked before COVID. There's certainly a new reality that is facing us now. So as John mentioned, I started in 2017, and with my start, really it was an opportunity to re-envision the Science Center. And we think of it in four main ways. The first is to be the best science center in the world for visitors of all ages. The second element of our vision is to be the must-see destination for Nashville and Tennessee. We want to be a regional regional hub for science and innovation. And then we also have a huge desire to help create the next generation of curious and creative problem solvers. Moving forward in accomplishing that vision over the last few years, we had really made a lot of progress going in that direction. As you can see here, certainly we impact a great number of people, including those school students, those young minds that we are trying to inspire towards a future of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And we had, in 2019, successfully completed the first capital campaign that we had done in about 10 years. And we opened two new major exhibit spaces with that. One is a maker space where families and school groups can come and they can build and create. And really it's their idea, their creativity that drives the day. And you partner that with rapid prototyping equipment or very simple basic tools and materials to really allow them to take the idea out of their head and make it real and bring it into life. We also opened a new music exhibit in 2019 called Soundbox. Here we are in Music City. It made all the sense in the world really to reach out and connect with those partners and bring that experience into the Science Center. One of the things that we want to make sure that we do here is create an experience that is reflective of the community and then also helps tie into a lot of the different partnerships that this community can bring forward to us. It's just a great way to build a sustainable model for us to operate. We had literally just started a capital campaign for the next phase of our transformation towards that vision, and that was to be a 7,000 square foot renovation of our human body gallery, which would then have been themed really around health, sports, and human performance. Nashville has a huge and growing sports market. And of course, healthcare is our core industry here, serving about $38.8 billion of revenue to this community every single year. It's extraordinary in terms of its scope. So those two seemed like a great partner. Things have obviously been disrupted at this point, but we will get back to that. That is still out there. It hasn't been eliminated. It's just been pushed out a little bit, as right now, really, we just try to recover a lot of the footing that we've lost. So we had a lot of forward momentum that was happening leading up to really March of this year. And just to give you kind of an illustration of what this has looked like on a visual sense, on the left of the screen, hopefully you all can see this, February 29th of 2020, we had our annual fundraiser, which we call Mad Bash. It was packed, tons of people coming in. This is the event that every year helps us really work through a lot of, or raise a lot of the contributed dollars that we rely upon. And then 2 weeks later is the picture on the right. So there's a pretty stark and obvious contrast between those two things. And that's the new reality that we found ourselves in at the middle of March. One thing to note is that we are a 501c3 not-for-profit. So as such, every year we do our best to take whatever revenues we generate, whether those are contributions and donations or earned revenues that come through our door, and we push those directly back into the mission to impact as many of those people as we possibly can in the community. So with that being said, we are not a place that had massive reserves waiting in the wings to tide us through a period of time. So on March 13th, when we officially closed to the public as a result of the COVID pandemic, we really had no idea how long that would last or how long we could sustain a closure. When we closed, just to give you a sense of the impact to us, on an annual basis, about 75% of every dollar that we earn comes through tickets, event programs, and those types of things that are sold directly to people who walk through our doors. By closing the doors, we immediately lost 75% of our revenue. The 25% that is contributed to us every year was also significantly challenged for two reasons. One is, with the impact of COVID, obviously everybody has been impacted by this, and every nonprofit has been impacted by this, many of which serve basic needs for folks. They're providing food, they're providing healthcare, they're providing shelter and other resources, or they're making sure that people don't lose their homes. Those are incredible organizations, and much of the philanthropic efforts of Nashville diverted very quickly into those feed and need types of industries. The other sort of compounding element was the fact that it seems like 20 years ago that this happened, but it was just in March. Nashville experienced a traumatic tornado that blew through town and devastated a portion of the community that had also the effect of a lot of the philanthropic organizations just trying to tend to taking care of the individuals that were impacted by that tornado. So we lost 75% of our revenue, and something happened that I'd never actually seen before, which was our earned revenue number actually went negative. And I kept asking my finance director, how do we have a negative on our earned revenues? And it's because we had already pre-sold so many tickets to events that we had to refund, that we were actually spending money out on the earned side of things. It was really quite remarkable. And then on the contributed side, we struggled right off the bat to raise money as well. So we really had no idea what we were facing and how we were going to be able to get through this. So on a financial side, to date, the impact for us has been about $3.6 million directly to us. That's about 6 months of what our typical annual operating would be. It's devastating for us. We took some drastic measures over the course of the last few months, really to try to mitigate this damage as much as possible. So I'm sure, like many of you all, we immediately went to a lot of cost saving measures as quickly as we could. We reduced our payroll, but we did maintain health benefits for our staff. It's at some point, actually in May, we wound up having to reduce our staff count from 84 to 38 people. So we are now less than half of the size that we were when we started our shutdown period. We've gone through a total reorganization of the staff as a result of that. We did as much as we could to defer overhead expenses by pushing off utility payments and anything else that was going to drain our cash flow. We borrowed, as many other organizations I'm sure did. We took advantage of the EIDL program as well as payroll protection program and the line of credit that we have as a facility through our local bank here. We revised our staffing and our operating model for the current fiscal year. We're less than half the size in all aspects, not just in the staffing size, but also in terms of what we anticipate our attendance to be, what we anticipate our revenues to be, and also what we anticipate our expenses to be. So all of that sounds really, really, really bad. So why are we calling this a happy little accident? Well, because we've chosen, as I said, to reframe a lot of what's happened, realizing that this isn't us alone and that we have to get creative and we have to be optimistic about solving this. And there certainly have been some bright moments in the last several months that have given us hope, given us inspiration to really push forward. One thing is that we activated our makerspace during the shutdown to produce PPE for local hospitals and other populations that did not have access to those materials or that were struggling to get access to those materials. The other thing that we did, and this is the focus really of today, is we got creative very quickly and we pivoted as fast as we possibly could into a virtual method. And so that's what I want to talk about just before making sure that I introduce Jason. So pivoting to virtual for us was almost a completely new method. We had almost no experience. We had very little content that we had produced, created, and then published in a virtual environment. We really focused on the hands-on. That's largely what differentiated us from anybody else, certainly within 200 miles of our front door. Every now and again, we would produce some videos. We would go out into the community, talk to individuals or businesses that were working in science, technology, engineering, arts, or math, and produce some really wonderful vignettes that help people see the science underneath the surface of what's happening here in Nashville. But by and large, we were fairly inexperienced with this. So pivoting to virtual for us was not natural, it was not easy, and it was not something that we felt we could immediately do with any degree of expertise. And I say that to say that we really surprised ourselves in terms of what we were able to do. So on screen here, you've got a couple of screenshots from some of the content that we now have on our website. From March, when we shut down, really through the end of May, our education team focused on creating as much virtual content as we possibly could. These were DIY videos, these were Facebook Live videos. We did a snake feeding, which was one of the most popular videos that we did. People seem fascinated by those kinds of things. I'm sure if we'd had a cadaverous hand here, we maybe would have dissected that and pounded on the nerves. We were really looking for any kind of way to connect with our audience. And the most important thing about it was, it wasn't about revenue generation. We knew that monetizing this was going to be a big challenge. Once we went into a virtual space, our competitive market was massive. We're competing against Discovery Channel. We're competing against every other media market that already has an entire industry of virtual content at their disposal. And they do this thing perfectly or very, very well. So we found ourselves really in a strange situation, competing with organizations that we'd never had to compete with before. And so for us, really the biggest element of going virtual was to stay relevant, was to stay in the field of view for our guests. One important thing for that is we were concerned that if this pandemic and the isolation, the closure went on for too long, that people's habits would change, that their normal routines would evolve to not include us anymore. And while we knew we were going through a short-term devastating blow, we had to find ways to not allow that to become a long-term existential threat to us. So we had to stay relevant so that when we had the opportunity to reopen, which we did on June 18th, that the patterns would resume to some extent anyway. As much as people are comfortable getting out and about, we didn't want to lose the connection to our audience. And then of course, there's always the mission side of it. You know, we exist here for a purpose. We exist to inspire our audiences and to help them understand the beauty of the world of science and what it means to them. We did not want to lose that mission connection. And so our push to virtual was all about staying connected to our audience. It had nothing to do with revenue. We didn't earn a single penny in any of this type of stuff. And we were able to do a number of things very, very, very well. I'll catch up a little bit more on the other side of Jason's part here, but one of the most important things that we did at the end of May was that we really kind of had to start focusing on reopening. And as I said, we reopened on June 18th. We started in-person camps that week. And then the other thing that we did was we started our annual program of Science in the Summer. And so when that happened, we moved away from creating this virtual content so that we could focus on a couple of core programs. Again, our summer in-person camps, and then our GSK Science in the Summer camp. So with that, setting the table for GSK Science in the Summer, I'll introduce Jason Muller, who is the gentleman who figured all of this out for us, and will walk you through what that experience was like, as well as your own hands-on experience of exploring this. So forgive me while I shift this computer over to him. This is just the way we're doing technology today.
Hi, everyone. How are you guys doing today? So my name is, again, as Jason Muller. I run the homeschool program and the GSK Science in the program here at the Adventure Science Center. Thank you, John, and thank you, UT, for hosting us. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk about one of the really cool programs that we've been doing. But first, the big question, I guess, is what is GSK Science in the Summer for those of you who've never heard of the program? GSK Science in the Summer is a fun, hands-on, engaging program that's also free to students that is offered targeting students who are in the 2nd through 6th grade age range. It is sponsored by GlaxoSmithKline, which is the pharmaceutical company based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Began in 1986 and is offered in partnership with the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, as well as the University of North Carolina Moorhead Planetarium. The idea behind the program is that the Franklin Institute, while working with a series of around 30 satellite partners throughout the United States, is able to go ahead and deliver a free hands-on science program to these students, free, again, across the United States. Right? The Adventure Science Center, of course, here is one of those partners in the Nashville area. Now, traditionally, how a typical summer would look was in February, we would all, I say we meaning the partners, would all travel to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we would have around a week-long conference where they would go ahead and they would give us everything that we needed to teach the program. They would give us the curriculum and would actually walk us step by step through all the hands-on curriculum that we would be doing. For example, last summer, we were doing the Science of Me, which kind of studied the human body. That's what this photo here was taken from, is of a heart dissection that was done during that particular program. They would give us all of the materials and supplies, and then would send us back to our institutions to go ahead and deliver the program through the summer. Traditionally, in a normal year, this was always done as an outreach program. We work with a couple of individual partners to reach as many students as possible here in the Nashville area. Normally, that's going to be YMCA and YWCA. We've also worked with Salama Urban Ministries, which is a small organization that's right next door to the Science Center, to go go ahead and reach some at-risk students. We also work with a couple of our local elementary schools, the big one being Whitsitt Elementary, to go ahead and hit those students who are going to that school. We also use Whitsitt Elementary as a pathway to reach our very extensive homeschool community. It wasn't uncommon for us to reach around 100 of the homeschool communities at Whitsitt during this time. Along with the supplies that we would be offered and the curriculum, we were also given a stipend by the Franklin Institute of around $10,000 in order to go ahead and deliver this program to these students. That allowed us to actually take all the supplies, pack them into a large van, this is the outreach van that was mentioned earlier, and bring them out to the students at their location so that they didn't actually all have to travel to the Science Center. Things changed a little bit once we got into this summer, right? Because of course, as we all know, along came COVID. Our plan prior to COVID hitting in March was basically already finished. We were planning to start on June 1st and then go through the end of July with a plan to hit all of these organizations. And we were looking at a target outreach of around 900 students. The shutdown, which affected virtually every single one of the partner institutions in this project, basically stopped the project from March until May. When the Franklin Institute was finally able to resume in the middle of May, they came back and announced several changes that were going to need to happen in order to run the program through the summer. The first was the project normally would run through the end of August. They extended our deadline there until November so that we would have the time to be able to go ahead and reach all of these students. They effectively forgave the student requirement. Normally, we were asked to try to reach at least 400 students every single summer with this free program so that we could make sure that we were making an impact. Due to the COVID situation and the uncertainness that came along with how are we going to reach these students, that was basically forgiven. And then they also changed how they plan to deliver the program. Again, traditionally, we were supposed to go out and physically be there with the students so that we could walk through all of these activities with them in person. GSK offered this year the option to do a kit-based program. So normally with the in-person programming, we're supposed to offer 4 hours of programming over usually 1 or 2 days period of time. This time they kind of limited that to 2 hours for a program, and one of those hours needed to be a virtual kit that was physically provided to the students so that they could do some physical activity, science activity at home that would be in line with the curriculum. And then the second hour was to be virtual. And they gave us the freedom to really go ahead and pick and choose what do you want to teach virtually. Our topic this year was chemistry, and so they wanted the science that we were teaching on the virtual end of things to be chemistry based and focused somewhat around the curriculum, but they decided to go ahead and give us the freedom. They planned out a physical kit and told all of us that we will be able to have the kit, or at least the general idea of the kit, to you by June 15th. And for our program, this is really where we kind of came in to our first real challenge. The big challenge was that we had already kind of finalized our schedule and we're supposed to be starting the program in June. I contacted all of my partners, so YMCA, YWCA, Salama Urban Ministries, and asked them if they would be willing to delay the program. And the response from our partners was actually very unanimous, which was they were still planning on actually running. Salama and YWCA had switched to a virtual model and they were planning on going and doing a virtual camp, while YMCA was getting back into the swings of being able to do things in person with about 12 students in a room, properly social distance. They believed that they could do it safely. And they all asked the same thing, which is, can you still do this program for us? We really need you right now. Right? Knowing this, and knowing that GSK wasn't going to be able to go ahead and get us a kit, at this point we were about 2 weeks out from our original start date, I decided that we needed to pivot. And so what I did was I submitted a rough draft proposal to the Franklin Institute and GSK and asked for permission to design and build our own kit based on their curriculum. The Franklin Institute and GSK were great about this. They took a look at the proposal, made some suggestions, and said, go for it. Give us your best shot, try to build these kits. And then when you're done with these, please let us know how they work so that we can go ahead and help other institutions that are also kind of in the same situation that you were. What you're actually looking at here on the screen is the original kit that we had. The original program had about 4 hours of programming in it, as mentioned before. This year, each hour was being focused on a specific scientist. So when I designed the kit, I wanted to make sure that the students would still have as full of an experience as possible. So I made sure that we had at least one activity, is usually the main activity for each individual kit or each individual scientist inside of this kit, so that the students would still have about 4 hours of hands-on activities that they could go ahead and do. The kits, as you can see, were designed to be able to fit into a single large gallon bag so that we'd be able to pack them quickly and hand them to the students. And I tried to design the kit with the items being able to be crossed between one activity and another. So multiple activities often would use kind of the same physical items. I was also really concerned with our students' ability to be able to replace items if they were lost or if they got used up. So we made sure that all of the activities would work with simple, easy household items, things like vinegar, things like water. The white container that you see in the top left was basically glue to make it go ahead and be a little bit easier for them, just in case that students dropped or accidentally spilled something out of the kits. That was for the kit component so that the students would be able to go ahead and bring those at home. For the virtual component, we decided to offer 3 options. The first was a fire chemistry lab where we basically were planning on doing things like a podium demonstration where the students would be able to see fire go ahead and burn up from a spore. We had a hands-on fire demonstration that we do here at the Science Center where you can use a bubble solution and actually light your hand on fire, and a couple of other fun little activities like that. The second was a animal talk about snake chemistry, which is from my days from Zoo Knoxville. And then the final option was just a walkthrough of the kit activities. In the end, no one actually picked the fire demonstration. The YWCA decided that they wanted their virtual program to be the snake talk, and everyone else decided to go ahead and do the kit walkthrough. Along with the kits, one of my biggest concerns virtually, since we didn't have a tremendous amount of experience teaching this, was how are we going to actually show and teach the students step by step what they needed to do in each of these activities. Just to go ahead and give you a quick view, this is what the entire kit looked like unpacked. Our biggest challenge with these kits was actually the liquid components. So again, we had water, we had a baking soda liquid, we had vinegar, and the big challenge is how do you pack this kits with all of these things leaking? And we wound up using these orange test tubes here at the top that went fine for that. We did eventually have to tape the lids down the first couple of kits. And this was one of the big challenges that we found with building the kits, is the first few kits did have some leaking problems. We eventually figured out a taping mechanism so that they would go ahead and all stay down. And after the first dozen kits or so, we managed to get that problem solved. We organized about 50 kits and built 50 kits at a time. Generally, it would take us around 8 hours to physically go ahead and build 50 kits. Over the course of the summer, we wound up building a grand total of 537 kits. We actually distributed 531 of these kits. 6 of them were not distributed only because while they were spoken for by a couple of our homeschool parents, they ultimately weren't picked up. We assembled the kits by hand in assembly style fashion. I wound up, out of the 537 kits, I wound up building by hand 437 of those on my own. The remaining 100 were actually built by my wife, who also works here at the Adventure Science Center, running our retail store. Now, as I mentioned, along with the kits, one of our big challenges was how do we actually teach this particular program to students, especially when they can't be here. In previous years, since we were actually in the building with the students, you could simply just go ahead and kind of give them a hand's-eye view of exactly what to do, or if the student was struggling, you could actually go over to the table where the student was at and help them out. This wasn't really a possibility since we were doing a virtual program. So my big concern was, how am I going to teach a student who might be struggling with one of these activities to make sure that they're getting the best experience and aren't getting frustrated with the science, so that they have a good experience with not only the program, but with the science in general. To try to mitigate and solve this, I wound up designing a PowerPoint slide, or really 4 PowerPoint slides, one for each activity. You're looking at the title slide of the first activity right here. And I use these instructions, these slideshows really as my instructions to walk the students through the program step by step. These slideshows were also uploaded to our website, so any student who received a kit but was for whatever reason not able to attend a virtual class with us would be able to go ahead and do the kits anyway. So even if we had a few students who managed to get a kit but just weren't able to make it that day, we wanted to make sure that they still had the same experience with the program so that they could just go to our website, download the instructions and go. The link for these kits, along with all of the items that were in the kit, were all on a piece of paper that was in the kit. So the student who had the kit could just open the kit, look at the piece of paper, type in the website and get going and go from there. The way that we kind of design the kits is we started each slideshow with the materials for the activity. Again, we had 4 activities in every single kit. And so to do one activity, we started by having the kids just go ahead and pull the specific items they needed for just that activity out of the kit. We made sure that all of these had pictures so that students who necessarily weren't the strongest readers would be able to look at the picture and see exactly what they needed. And then for the virtual students, most of them also had cameras. And so what we found was really kind of a nice situation was that I could simply ask the student to go ahead, pull the item out of the kit, and then physically hold it up in front of the camera. And that way I could go and see, does the student have the right item, or did they accidentally perhaps grab the wrong item, in which case I could easily go ahead and correct it. This tactic wound up working extremely well for us. The instructions we tried to do in a very similar way to the materials list. Each instruction, we would put just 1 or 2 very simple sentences to go ahead and give the directions. So for example, again, this is activity A, pick up the popsicle stick. And we'd made sure that all the popsicle sticks were labeled A, B, C, so that the student would know I need this specific popsicle stick. All I need to do is pick this up and then dip the end of my stick into the powder in bag A. Again, because we were worried that we might have a few, especially of our second graders, might not necessarily be the strongest readers, we tried to go ahead and give a picture that would make it very clear to the students, this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. I could then go ahead, for students who were attending the program virtually, I could then flip a document camera that I had attached to the computer onto bag A and physically be able to show them exactly what they needed to do step by step. Teaching the program was a lot of fun. Actually, this, as you can see kind of from some of the pictures, the students actually wound up having a blast with it. And for some of the kids, this was actually, they said that this was their best science in the summer experience because they felt it was a little more one-on-one. But different groups did cause us to have to react in kind of different ways, just depending on what the situation was. So every time I would sit down to do one of these virtual programs with the group, I never knew quite what to expect. But because we had the instructional model and the kids all had the kits, we were able to kind of be able to adjust things on the fly if needed to. The biggest challenge was probably the YMCA program. The YMCA program, you may remember, was the program that we had where everybody was actually still kind of in person together, and we were the virtual ones. And usually the situation there had the students with about 12 students in a room, and they would have a single computer, and they would link the single computer to a large projector so that the kids could see me and hear me. The problem was, because the computer was linked to a projector, they could see me, but I couldn't actually see them at all. And so what we wound up doing to make sure that the students would be able to stay on the right track was I would go ahead and go through the instructional slideshow, but then all the students, because there were 12 of them, had a chaperone, an adult chaperone, camp counselor, if you will, in the room with them. And so what we wound up doing is the counselor would go ahead and type back to me when the students were ready with one of the instructional steps. And the instructor could also ask if a student had questions. The instructor could go ahead and relay the questions to me. So we use the instructor as a relay from students to me, while the students could see everything that I was still doing and be able to follow along. And after a time or two of trial and error, this solution wound up working very nicely for the rest of the summer. Homeschool and YWCA and Salama Urban Ministries were all a little bit easier. The picture here in the middle with the timber rattlesnake is actually showing YWCA. And these three groups, all of the students were actually at their own home still. And so they had their own cameras and they had their own computers. So at that point, I could actually almost teach it like a regular class where the students could go ahead and show the materials, show their work. And if they had questions, could use either the chat or just raise their hand and I could call on them from here. YWCA, as I mentioned, was the only one that did the snake chat. So we didn't actually walk through the materials kits with them. We walked through the materials kits with every single other group. Fun kind of side note, the only issue we actually had with the YWCA group was we do have a couple of live animals here at the Science Center, one of them being the Eastern Chain King Snake who lives in my office. We were doing the presentation with her and the snake decided she had a bad day. And so right in front of the entire group, she decided that today was the good day to try to eat the instructor. So I had to deal with teaching the program while dealing with a snake bite all at the same time, which definitely led to a couple of entertaining moments. Great. Now, what I would like to go ahead and do now, what I would like to go ahead and do really quickly now is kind of try to give you an idea of what does it actually look like to do a virtual program, but still have this kind of hands-on component. And one of the things that one of our big challenges when we pivoted to the homeschool side of things for this fall was we were still going to need to do this kind of virtual programming, but we weren't necessarily going to have the time to build all of the kits for the students. So when we pivoted to homeschool, we've really focused on what can we do with the kids with the materials they have at home. And the answer is, especially on the engineering side, there's quite a few things you can do. So what I'd like to do for the next roughly 5 minutes is give all of you a little bit of a challenge. And here is your challenge. On your desks, you should have a fair amount of just general office supplies, things like pencils, pens, sticky pads, notepads, you name it. Your challenge in the next 5 minutes, what I'd like you to do is take these office supplies and I want you to try to build the those kind of office supplies. I want you to try to build the tallest possible tower. Anything on your desk goes and may be used as a material for this activity. Ladies and gentlemen, you have, we'll say roughly
Let's do about 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Go for it.
Good luck.
And your next true right, so you want to just save the computer. I found it.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
You know, really, this is just a fun way for us to see what you all have in your offices.
Yep. Well, while you guys are building and working with like a homeschool class, what we would go ahead and instead of just throwing them to the wolves like this for entertainment.
Are those cantilevered staplers?
I think that is a cantilever stapler, actually.
On top of a very tall coffee mug.
Oh yeah, I love it.
That's
great.
awesome. So what we could do while you guys are building this, what we could do with students at this point for engineering is this is actually how we start one of our engineering classes, is we quickly teach the students what are the steps of the engineering design process, and then tell them, all right, guys, your goal is to build the tallest possible tower, so that they can go ahead and go through the steps of taking stock of what they have, coming up with a plan, building a prototype, testing the prototype, and then inevitably when the prototype might accidentally fall over, have to go ahead and redesign and restructure things.
Nice job.
Some of these are awesome.
Yeah, this is also usually the first step in our employee application process too, just so you know. You're all hired.
Some of these are spectacular.
That's awesome. Wow. Okay. All right. We've got one going up on a lamp over there. That's good. It involves one of our favorite elements of
Yeah.
any experiment, which is danger and fire.
Absolutely.
Good job, Jerry.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Very cool. Oh yeah, I like it. I like the scissors. Good. Yeah, using the little sort of the drinking opening in the turbis to. I love it.
Nice.
Yeah. Well done.
Chase, is that a vacuum cleaner head on the top of yours there?
No comment on what that is.
Okay.
Could be a remote.
All right. All right. Cool.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe it's a remote.
All right. I'm gonna resume sort of following up, but keep the structures there if you can. That's part 2 of the experiment, is to see how long they can sort of naturally hold their balance. So hopefully you get some sense of the fact that even though there's a distance in this experience, and even though that it's virtual, there is still a connection there, and also sort of a reminder that oftentimes, simple is good. Right. I mean, oftentimes it's more about the idea than it is about the stuff. And we're an organization. We've got a lot of stuff. We have a lot of different materials. We've got 3D printers. We've got laser cutters. We've got all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, oftentimes if you strip that away from the experience, you get to the essence of what we're trying to do, which is fundamentally communicate and help people become more curious, creative, collaborative, and confident. And those things, it doesn't matter if you're here or at home. It doesn't matter if we're instructing in real time, in person, or if it's recorded video across a distance. Those ideas can still permeate and they can still be delivered. And that really is the essence of the experience of the Adventure Science Center and science in general. So so hopefully you got a sense of the joy and the fun that can be part of that. And then certainly you can dive into, well, why do these things balance, and how does this work, or why does it fall over? And those are scientific principles that govern and dictate all of those things. So what I'll do, just sort of to kind of close out our time together, is focus a little bit on, sorry, I'll get back to the presentation here, on where we go from here. What have we learned from all of this, and how do we carry that forward in a meaningful way that becomes sustainable for us and also helps build sustainability for the Science Center, as I said, for the next 75 years. So some of the new opportunities that we've discovered accidentally by having to be sort of pushed into this inherently creative space is we've now adapted our homeschool model. Jason, who oversees our homeschool program, does a lot of in-person instruction, but also does virtual at the same time, as he mentioned, and balancing those two things at the same moment is very, very challenging and tricky. But we are figuring out how to do these things and to keep the quality of that experience very, very, very strong. We're also now working on how we connect with schools, that schools are teaching remotely, some are in person, some are a little bit of both. We're adapting this model that we've learned and transitioning that into our school environment. We do not want to lose the connection with the 75,000 students that we've had the opportunity to impact every year. And we've now actually realized that in going virtual, but doing these hybrid virtual instruction, but hands-on activities, we can actually impact more students than we ever have in the past. So there is a huge growth potential that has now arisen out of this opportunity, and something that initially is perceived as a real setback. We also are starting to map out ways that we can do other virtual content, such as resuming that series of Science Under the Surface in the community, getting out into places of business that do science and technology in very fun and creative ways. A couple of years ago, for example, for Halloween, we went to a local makeup place that does Halloween makeup and does film and theatrical makeup, and we just profiled them. And of course, it's all the science in the materials that they use to create these incredible disguises. And we had one of our folks get done up as a zombie and then walk around a parking lot for a little while, which was hilarious to watch, as sort of the, for those of you who remember the Alan Funt videos back in the day, it was exactly like Candid Camera. So a lot of fun to do those types of things. We are in the process of building out a virtual studio now. We've taken a portion of our facility and repurposed that, and we're now building that so that we can record and produce live content through that space. And we're in the process of acquiring the equipment that will allow us to continue doing these things going forward. So our biggest takeaways that have meant a lot to us, and that I would share with you all, is first and foremost, before going in any direction, we talked to our consumer. We tried to figure out who are the constituencies that matter most. What is that core group of folks that we need to impact, and what are the things that they want? We wanted to make sure that if we were going to move in a given direction, that it was an informed direction, had a good likelihood of being successful and useful. So that was the first big thing, and it also helped us eliminate any mistakes, or at least going in a wrong direction by guessing what the visitors might want, and then trying to sort of foist it upon them when in fact it's not something that they have any real interest in. The other thing that we did, and this has not been easy, is that we've reframed and shifted our mindset from one of loss to one of gain and opportunity. And I sort of look at that across a few different categories. First and foremost, we lost a tremendous number of staff, our friends and our colleagues that are no longer part of the Science Center. And they're struggling, to be honest. We have now looked at that as an opportunity to train and to elevate staff members who previously may not have been in leadership positions, or might not have been given opportunities to say, well, what do you want to do? What are the things that you would like to do? And you really now sort of have the opportunity to bring a much stronger voice into the mix of things that we offer going forward. We are also much more incorporating of decision making. So folks from at all levels of the organization are part of the decision-making models. There is no top-down structure here, and that was in place beforehand. But with a staff of 84, you've got a lot more voices to entertain than you do with a staff of 38. So there's a lot more transparency and idea sharing here. And then we're also giving more folks an experience in what it means to say no. One of the hardest things that we've found is how to say no to something. It's much more difficult to choose what you're not going to do than it is to choose what you are going to do. And we certainly were an organization, we love serving our community. And so we tried to be, in some cases, all things to all people. And we've really had to kind of look back and say, no, let's focus on that core. In losing revenue, and again, we've lost a lot of revenue, what we've gained is we've gained great engagement with our board in terms of working with them to become advocates and fundraisers in the community with us. And it's also allowed us to have a much greater dialogue with our funders. It's also helped us think much more efficiently and cost effectively in terms of how we deliver the programs. Again, simplify is a lot of what we are working towards doing, knowing that that can be just as effective. In losing programs, as I said, we had to kind of scale down to our focus. When you only have half of your staff as you had prior, there are things that we can no longer do anymore. And so we had to have a real good conversation about what are the things that we cannot continue, or what are the things that we need to put on a back burner for now, and we'll resume at a later date. What that's allowed us to do is it's allowed us to focus on our core impact, the things that really matter to those guests that we're talking to. It's allowed us to prioritize the offerings that matter most, that are going to have the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. It's also given us a reset to think about, okay, now that we've sort of come back to this smaller sense of program offerings, as we grow and go forward, let's be very deliberate and intentional and purposeful in the things that we add back into that mix. And that is a great conversation for us to have. And it's also allowed new ideas to flourish. We would probably not naturally have gone into creating a virtual studio this quickly had it not been for the pandemic. So now that we're there, we're looking at the opportunistic side of what that enables us to do. And then by losing our attendance, we've gained more dialogue with our audience. We are constantly talking to them to figure out what are the things that we're doing now that work well for them. Do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable? What are things that we can do to improve the quality of the environment that we're providing to them? And we're also providing a richer experience for those who choose to come. When there are fewer people in the building, we can have a much more intentional and direct interaction with them. We have a great floor staff that when we've got 1,500 people in the building, half a dozen floor staff get overwhelmed very quickly. It's hard to have a lot of individual conversations. But when you're at 10% of that number, now we can really talk with people. And so the folks that are coming are having a really, really rich and wonderful experience. And they're staying just as long as they stayed before COVID, and in some cases, even longer, which is wonderful. So
from our standpoint, the other element in a big way is to move forward. We are a science museum, and at the end of the day, we love nothing more than data. We love nothing more than to analyze and analyze and analyze. But at some point, we have to go forward. We have to try. We have to experiment and give ourselves that freedom to have that risk and to take the risk to experiment in a direction that's informed, again, by conversations with our audience. But there comes a point where you just have to go. You cannot get to 100% certainty really about anything, particularly now. And so we've really had to figure out where is that point for us where we commit and we move forward and we realize that we may not be 100% right, but we're going to implement systems that allow us to continually assess how well we're doing so that we can pivot and adjust as needed. And that's one of the biggest important things for us is sometimes you have to go. The worst thing we can do at this point is stop. We've got to continue moving. And going back to the very beginning, it's because we have to maintain that connection with our audience. We have to stay relevant to them, and we have to continue delivering the mission that we're in this community to do. And then the last thing is focusing on near-term solutions that have long-term benefit. It's very easy in this time to become extremely reactive and to try to just fix what's at our fingertips right now and to see a month, 2 months, or 3 months down the road when none of that future really is all of that certain. What we've really forced ourselves to do is ask the question of, if we are going to do this thing, will it matter in 5 years that we've done this? And if the answer to that question is sort of a resounding yes, then we go back to that previous point, we move, we go. And that's where a lot of the pivoting that Jason has done comes from. It's where our move into the virtual space is going. This is not something that is just going to be here for the here and now. It won't just be here for the next 6 months, 8 months, 2 years. This is an opportunity now. Going virtual with our program offerings, that's something that we'll be able to do forever. And again, it's something that not only allows us to solve this immediate challenge that's facing us, but it will give us a huge platform to continue impacting many more lives than we've ever been able to impact before. You think back to that number, 400,000 that we were impacting on an annual basis, primarily through in-person visits, either on site or out in the community. We could easily get to a point where our virtual alone is impacting hundreds of thousands of people. If we can deliver school programs to every single school student in the state of Tennessee, that's over 1 million school students right there. So again, there is that opportunity to experience extraordinary growth by evolving into that new mindset. And that's really our biggest element that we've taken from there. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I think we've got some time here, hopefully, John, to answer some questions that may have come through. And because I'm so terrified I'm going to completely blow up the technology here, I haven't been able to see if any questions are coming through on the chat line. So if there are questions out there, please let me know, and Jason and I are happy to handle those.
Yeah, Steve, we've got several questions coming in, and to our audience, I think we've got a small enough group that you could ask it in person if you want. But let's go ahead and get to the ones that are in the chat. So the first question came from Teresa about how the kits were distributed. I think this was during.
Yeah, I'll come over here. So the kits were distributed really depended on which group we were talking about. Salama Urban Ministries for us was the easiest one because they were right down the road. I literally threw the kits into my Mazda, drove them over there, and dropped them off. I also did that with a couple of the YMCA locations as well. One of them was literally on the way home from work, so when I would go home, I would just throw it in the car and then drop it off. YWCA, several of the YMCA kits, and then the homeschoolers all picked their kits up at the Science Center. It was especially important that the homeschoolers did that because they were all scattered kind of to the four winds all around the city. And so they would come to the Science Center. We had a couple of specified pickup times. And then for the last group of homeschoolers, we literally just left the box of remaining kits out in the front desk, and they were able to go ahead and pick them up whenever they wanted. So it depended on the group.
Gotcha. Thanks, Jason. Okay, and this one comes from our elder statesman in the crowd, Jerry. Jerry asks, what are the guiding principles we should keep in mind as we redesign our organizations, and what are the questions we should be asking?
Guiding principles. Well, a lot of it will come back to, those last points that I brought up in terms of making sure that you don't stagnate, making sure that we don't just sort of stop in our tracks, whether through its analysis or confusion, fear, any of those types of things. For us, it's really about, you have to find some way to quickly be able to make decisions and move in a direction and acknowledge that that direction might need to be adjusted. So build systems in that allow you to continue paying attention to what's happening. For us, for example, to give a concrete understanding of that, we talk to our members constantly. And so when we're providing public programs or whether we're thinking of creating a new exhibit in this time, we're talking with them on a continuous basis. We have to sometimes be careful not to over survey them in terms of what their input might be, but we're talking to that group on a continual basis to make sure that any direction that we do go is likely to be successful. And that's just honestly so much of what it is. It's hard to, I guess another thing that I would say in this, just sort of as an overarching mindset, if you're waiting to make the right decision, as we've found, we may wind up waiting too long. And to be quite frank, in a lot of cases, there may not be a right decision. There may not be a good decision. Often the decisions that we were making early on, we're trying to make the least bad decision. There was no good choice. When we were facing a lot of the major crises at the beginning, when it came to reducing our staff and reducing our costs, none of those were good decisions, not a single one. Were they the right decisions? I believe we did make the right decisions, and I believe we made them at the right time. But we had to immediately, and I remember this conversation in our senior leadership team when we were really starting to figure out what are the big moves that we need to make quickly. We just started off with the discussion of, okay, there is no good way to go about this. We have to take this idea of a good decision and probably put that on a shelf. If we're lucky enough to find one, then great. But let's not focus on only finding good decisions. Let's figure out what are the decisions that we need to make that are the right decisions, that are the least bad in a lot of circumstances. And that helped us move more quickly. Otherwise, I think we would have gotten stuck in a lot of ways looking for the best decisions. And we just didn't have the luxury of time. We had to reduce our expenses very, very, very quickly through some very drastic measures that still sting. And they're still painful to think about and to relive. But they were the right decisions that we had to make. So I hope that's an answer to your question that's helpful.
Steve, I think we could, if you just hit stop share screen, then that could take us to that gallery view. I think we'll be okay. There we go.
Got it? Okay,
Perfect. Great. Thank you. And thank you for your response there. Okay. So our next question in the chat is, we usually host an in-person STEM camp each summer, and you were one of our field trips. We stay in touch with our campers by meeting one Saturday a month throughout the school year. Now we need to plan for virtual 2021. This has been very helpful. How can we access some of your kits and virtual programs to provide the same great experience to our campers?
Yeah, I think the easy way to do that is we can make sure to share either through John, we can share Jason's contact information and you can reach out to us directly. And then we can begin the conversation. Again, it'll go back to some of the original questions of what do you need? What are the things that you're looking for? What are the experiences that you're hoping for those kids to have? And then we'll work to adapt what we've got around that model. But that's probably the most effective.
I'm more than happy to help anybody out in this vein. For the instructional PowerPoint slides for the Science in the Summer program, if you're interested in seeing them, those are also still, I think, on our website too. So you should be able to just go to adventuresci.org. I think it's /Science in the Summer. And if you scroll down, the 4 activity guides should be right there, which will give you a step-by-step how we kind of designed those. But yes, if you have any questions or have any requests for like activities, I'm also sitting on roughly 100 homeschool lessons that I've written over the years, so I'm more than happy to help out. This is one of the things we learned, is this is the time period where we can best serve each other by all working together.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put Jason's email address in the chat.
Yeah, please do.
For everybody.
Perfect. Thanks, John.
Okay. Let's see here. How do we access the virtual camps? Is there registration? That's from Tanya.
Virtual, you mean the GSK camp?
Oh, so the the best way to access the instructions, as I mentioned, are online. If you want my physical lesson plan for it, I would just go ahead and email me, as mentioned before. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question? There was another part there too.
Is there a registration?
For Science in the Summer, we didn't have registration this year for any of the groups except for the homeschool students. Registration for the homeschool students on my end was really easy because I have a email list of all the schoolers in the area already. And so all I did was I emailed them and said, hey, I'm doing this program on this date at this time. Please email me the following pieces of information. I need to know who are the kids who are coming, and I need to know how many kits you have so I can make sure that I prepare those. And that's how I handled registration. That way we weren't overburdening our I can't speak today, I'm sorry. But that way we weren't overburdening our web team who were trying to get registrations and things for other programs online. But the other groups like YMCA, YWCA, they actually had already done the registration on their end of things. So all I needed to know from them was how many students do you have and how many kits do you need?
Thanks, Jason. Another question. Steve, you mentioned capturing customer feedback. What are some practical ways that you guys are doing that?
There are really three different ways that we go about doing that. First and foremost, we do a fair number of web surveys that are very easily to distribute, easily distributed. We do talk to our members particularly quite a bit. They're our closest affinity group. They respond in very high numbers, especially now. It's a very vocal group in terms of these are the things that we want to make sure are available to us when we come and visit the Science Center. So that's one method. The other one is we literally will just talk to people inside the space. We can strike up a lot of informal conversations, or we will actually have a survey that we can do in person with what's called a visitor intercept. And then last but not least, we have really our most valuable asset in communicating with our guests is our guest services team. And we can give them a question. Sometimes we'll pick a question of the week or a question of the month for our guest services team to ask to make sure that we're capturing that one piece of information. So whether it's something that our marketing team wants to understand, or our exhibits team wants to understand, or our public engagement team, our guest services team is a very, very effective tool for doing that. It depends on the nature of what we're trying to understand and how far out we want that information, how far in advance we would like to be able to capture that type of thing. So we have a number of different methods to try to tap into the interests and the desires of our visitors that just serve a wide range of purposes and can be very, very effective. And one thing that is actually really pretty fascinating from some of this time, again, as I said, in losing visitors, we've actually created a deeper connection with the guests. They are responding at a much higher rate than they probably normally would. When we send out a survey to visitors, particularly members, our response rate in some of those survey questions will be as high as 36, 37%, which is astounding to get that type of, not just an open rate, but a response rate back from a typical survey. You know, oftentimes you'll send a survey out and you're lucky if you get maybe 5% back. So to have a more than 30% participation in that tells us that they are very interested in communicating with us and that they are still very connected to what we're doing. And that's a comforting thing to have. And it's great to have that response too.
That's great. Thank you. Other questions for Steve or Jason?
I would say, if I can follow up on one quick thing on that, one of the tactics and techniques that we've discovered through our surveying is we ask ourselves two questions with every survey that we send out. One, what is the least number of questions that we can ask in order to get the information that we want? Let's not try to do an overall, how do you feel about life survey, right? This is a survey to figure out one very specific thing. So for example, if we're going to create an exhibit and we're not sure, do we pick engineering? Do we pick, sports? Do we pick X, Y, and Z? We ask that question very specifically. If you could choose a topic for our next exhibit, what would it be? And just really focus on that one deep piece of information. We get responses faster and we get a much higher participation rate than if we ask sort of a broad survey of how are you feeling about coming back to the Science Center? What are the things that you would expect? What are the things that you're concerned about? Those surveys, we don't get nearly the same response rate back. So I would highly recommend that any survey be very directly focused on a limited amount of information around that. And then the second part is just to make sure that the questions are worded very, very, very simply. and make it easy for people to respond so that they can do so quickly and effectively. Keep it simple is really sort of what it boils down to. Those have been very, very, very effective tactics for us to get good information.
And you've been primarily targeting your members with that. Do you ever do any external surveying of just guests, non-members?
We do. It's a little more complicated because communicating with them is a challenge. So we did a visitor survey. Some organizations will do these things more frequently. They're quite expensive, but we did a comprehensive visitor and potential visitor survey about 3 years ago. It's one of the first things that I did when I got here was just who's our consumer base and who is not our consumer base, but could be. And so we did a very, very wide ranging survey. We did visitor intercepts here, but we also purchased a number of lists. So I'm going to apologize in advance if any of you got spammed by the survey that we sent out. But it was a great way for us to reach into an audience that either weren't really sure who we were or what we did, or maybe they had the perception that we were really just for young kids. And meanwhile, we're doing a lot in the adult segment as well. So that comprehensive visitor survey was very, very helpful to us.
Thank you. Other questions for Steve or Jason? I'm kind of interested to know, Steve, what you guys are doing to promote the Science Center, just advertising, social media, like what are some of the things, ways that you're getting word out?
So there's a fair amount of word of mouth. There are a lot of other groups. For example, the homeschool group is a very communicative group, and by tapping into that, because not only do they communicate well, but they rely very much on the feedback and input of other homeschooling families. That's a great group to be connected with. So they often go overlooked in a lot of communities, and I would not overlook them. They're just a wonderful group. And again, very, very interested in the experience and will give you great feedback, and will spend a lot of time, honestly, giving you the feedback that you want.
Yes.
Before we did the homeschool pivot this year into that sort of in-person and virtual model, Jason sent out an email to the families and said, hey, would some of you be willing to just come and talk to us? And so we had a focus group here in the Science Center, and we had some participate virtually. And for about an hour, they gave us great feedback that helped us understand how to move that program forward. We do a ton of social media marketing. We now, because of our scale back in staff, our marketing team is a department of one person, which depending on the day is overwhelming or awesome. It can be overwhelming because there's so many different things that we are trying to market. Even though we've scaled back our offerings, we are still marketing a good number of programs and events and offerings there, and some new exhibits that open up. But she focuses primarily on a lot of the social media, knowing that really is fairly pervasive. We do some radio, we don't do any television, we do almost no sort of print media types of things. It's almost really fairly grassroots and low cost, which is certainly helpful in a time like this, knowing that those options that don't cost a huge amount of money are fairly effective. We used to do billboards. We used to do a lot of things that are costly and also very hard to track in terms of their effectiveness. Right now, we're really focused on the strategies and tactics that we can look on the back end and have some reasonable understanding that they are impactful in driving people through our business.
Thank you.
By the way, the overwhelmingly awesome element of being a department of one is like consensus is an immediate thing to have happen. It's like, what do I want to do? Oh, I'm going to do that. So there you go.
She's great too. So.
And she is amazing. It reminds me of this phrase I learned years ago, is the best form of leadership is a benevolent dictatorship, right? and in a way, having that department of one, if you're a benevolent dictator, it just works fabulously. Unfortunately, her instincts are very, very good, and she's an incredibly bright gal. And so she's been very, very fascinating. Oh, I love that someone has seen our billboard. That's awesome. So cool. Yeah. We actually won an award for that billboard a couple of years ago. It's funny. So.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. Well, last call for questions for Steve or for Jason before we wrap it up here. I guess that's it. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you all so much. It was really, really wonderful. We're getting some things coming in the chat window here. Steve, Jason, you guys are amazing. That was a fantastic presentation. Really appreciate your time and diving into that topic with us. It was super informative. I really enjoyed it a lot. So thank you all so much. Thank you guys, everybody that attended today. Great crowd and some really good questions we had here. So appreciate you all showing up and participating with us. Oh, what are we doing with these towers? Are we doing anything with the towers at this point? We're just leaving them on our desk?
Let's check back in a month and see who's still there.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Come out and visit. We'd be happy to have you.
Thank y'all.
If anybody has any questions, just feel free again to email me. I'll be more than happy to back. I am teaching a couple classes today, so if it's not until later in the day, I do apologize.
And and I'm glad you mentioned that because we will be sending out a survey to everybody and a link to the recording at some point. So you'll have that in your inbox as well.
Well,
Thanks,
y'all.
guys.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Have a good weekend.
Stay safe,
You
guys.
too.